Hey, what's up, everybody? I am Michael Woods, founder of Inclusive Sport Design, and welcome to the ISD podcast, where we talk all things inclusion in sport with amazing guests who are out there making inclusion happen so you can be inspired to make inclusion happen in your club or sport organization too. We are, as usual, recording on beautiful Gundungurra country, and I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Gundungurra people and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I also pay my respects and welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and all other Indigenous and First Nations peoples who are watching or listening in today. Now, for those of you who are here for the first time, maybe this is the first episode you're listening to, or you are new to Inclusive Sport Design, you've never seen us before, I highly recommend you listen to our episode 0, which is our introduction episode, where you can find out more about who I am, what Inclusive Sport Design is all about, and what we hope to achieve with the ISD podcast. So I'll pop a link in the show notes so you can check that out. Today is episode number 3. And today I'm with Lauren Schwarr to explore how she is shaping the future of sport by measuring the impacts of what we do. Now, Lauren is a basketball coach turned tech entrepreneur that was inspired to solve the pain and measurement of evaluation after completing a master's degree in sport policy. Originally from the suburbs of Chicago, Lauren has lived in multiple countries, coached basketball around the world, and is building her tech startup, Fathom Performance. Now, Fathom Performance is an app that aims to change the way we demonstrate impact, both in the sporting industry and for our inclusion efforts everywhere. Lauren is working to make it possible to evaluate inclusion initiatives more effectively and accurately so they can be improved, scaled, and reproduced. Lauren also likes good stories, good Nike commercials, and a good workout challenge as well. So let's get into it. Lauren Schwaar, welcome to the Inclusive Sport Design podcast.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I don't want to waste any more time on the intro because we've got so much to cover today. I want to make sure we get deep into the conversations that I know we're going to have. So I'm keen. Can you tell us, like you're a basketball player by trade, I guess, and a coach as well. That's your background. So tell us a little bit about your basketball career and your coaching career and sort of the journey you've gone on there.
Certainly. I grew up homeschooled. That means that my experience playing basketball at an early age was pretty rudimentary at best. And I started when I was 12, but it became something I became quickly passionate about. I was able to play at a small D3 school in the middle of Illinois, kind of middle of nowhere where we only had sport to keep us occupied. So I was not planning on making basketball my everything, but I was glad to be able to play at the college level. I came in pretty under-resourced, if you will. Just I hadn't played at the level or to the degree that teammates of mine had played. So I worked hard and struggled to keep up sometimes as far as needing to know the game and being as familiar and comfortable with it alongside people who had played much longer than I had. But I'm really thankful for that experience because I had to learn a lot more of the sports and the tactical, strategic sides of it at an older age, I suppose. So is much more interesting to me from that kind of tactical and strategic standpoint. And so from that point on, found myself really interested in the prospect of coaching. I watched my coach's lifestyle and loved everything about what he did. He built a team. He interacted with a group of elite driven people. I'm not trying to burst myself. I was, one of the bench warmers. So the group that he was working with was a group of driven, high aspiring, high performance individuals who were all working together to achieve a purpose, and spent most of the time in a gym, and then we traveled to games and had a great time, and hopefully did well, and then came back and did it again the next day. And I loved the rhythm of sport. I loved the environment of higher education, and in the States, sporting and sport teams is such a huge part of the college experience, which is not the same everywhere, but I really enjoyed getting to be a part of that. So coaching became a trajectory for me. And after graduating college, I coached for what would have been 6 or 7 seasons at various small colleges across the States. But I also got the opportunity to do some international coaching. So I worked with the national team in Thailand on a short-term contract. was able to take their women's team to a couple different international tournaments. And that kind of inspired my love for international sport, especially basketball, but the sporting space around the world. And it was so different than what I had grown up in. I was immediately kind of captivating. I then was able to get involved coaching in other spaces in Europe. So I've been able to coach and be involved in basketball in a number of different countries, usually on short-term stints, coming in and assisting existing coaching staff and working on anything from youth camps to working with national teams to helping design academy curriculum, et cetera. So I've just had the opportunity to coach in a number of different spheres and with a wide variety of coaches in a lot of places around the world, which I'm really thankful for because it's broadened my perspective, not only of coaching, but of sport and how it works in different places. And also of a sport that can be a huge part of one culture, but a very minimal or unknown part of others. So that's been a really good spectrum for me to experience.
Yeah, I'm really interested to know a little bit more about how the experience of coaching and working in those different country contexts and different cultures has shaped and influenced the way you coach basketball, but also the way you kind of think about how you operate in your other areas of interest, which we're going to get into soon in terms of your work. So how has that influenced your coaching and the way you see the world as a professional?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. One, it has taught me a lot of skills that aren't coaching specific. I've learned a ton from my coaching experiences about how to be humble and not enter a situation assuming that I know the right way or I've been doing the right way the whole time and correcting everyone around me to do it my way. That was a hard learning curve, especially entering a space like working in Thailand, for instance, coming from a very, very American, very industrial, very work ethic oriented culture to trying to work with elite athletes, but in a culture that just operates very differently and sees accomplishment, sees teamwork, sees time and everything that goes into basketball and into sport very differently. So that was very difficult for me at first. And so every time I've entered different spaces and maybe been asked different things or been exposed to different ways of thinking about the central tenets of what I do, they have helped me grow. And they've taught me a lot about the vastness of how things can be done and that I'm not always right. That's been a good lesson and one I'm still learning.
Yeah.
It was also, it's helpful to see sport in spaces where, like you said, in places where it's not the main dominant sport that everyone knows. It's been a privilege to work alongside those who are propelling a sport when it's a very grassroots kind of 8 or 10 or 12 down the list option. So that's been hugely helpful to working in places like the UK or places like Asia and certain other areas where basketball is not well known. Getting to work alongside highly passionate people, that's been really good for me just to look and see, sometimes what it takes to get something off the grounds and to propel a sport and to get people involved and excited about it. So tons of good lessons from my experience.
Yeah, totally. And I guess there's having those kinds of experiences builds your cultural competence and your ability to work in those different contexts and dealing with those different people and different languages and different ways of doing things and different systems as well. The way sport operates in, say, Asia is very different to the way it operates in the UK. Despite, in some of those countries, basketball is a lower or lesser known or lesser rated in sport. And so there's still differences, even though maybe the sport holds a similar place within the system itself. I want to take a little sidestep kind of away from sport before we come back to that, because I think it's worthwhile, getting to know, I guess, some of the other things that influence your life and your perspective on the world. And it's kind of related to culture in some respects, but something that I know that's really important to you is your religion and your relationship with God. You describe yourself as a child of God, and so I'm really interested to know kind of what role religion plays in your life and how that kind of influences, I guess, the work that you do and the way you go about things. Because I guess, I was brought up as a Catholic. I went to church as a kid, baptized and all of that. I went to a Catholic high school. So So I've had that kind of just some cultural lens through my kind of growing up years and things. But these days I would kind of consider myself non-religious. It's not something that has become or
Sure.
remained part of my life or the kind of influences the way I view the world today. But I would say that the kind of the values of, the Christian values that have kind of been instilled in me as a young person do influence the way I view the world. Things like, the kind of morals that I hold to, and, looking at things like, altruism and equality and empathy and care for others and tolerance and those sort of things are all very Christian values, and the values embedded in a lot of religions, but certainly the Christian perspective on those things has informed the way I view the world and the way I kind of operate in it. So yeah, I'm keen to know kind of, how does religion and your Christian experience influence and guide what you do, and what role does it play?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. I would say that my relationship with God is the most important core elements of my life around which everything situates itself. And that has been true for me for the entirety of my kind of adult aware life. I grew up in a Christian home. And so that's always been my environment. But while in college, I needed to decide whether that was important to me or not, and whether I believed that or not. And
Mhm.
in that time, I met God in a more personal way. And and because of that, that relationship with God informs everything I do and how I see the world. And I appreciate the question because sport is not always an environment where that's a part of the picture or a conversation that would be very common, and sometimes even treated a little bit more antagonistically. And I understand why,
Mhm.
because there's lots of antagonism, if you will, coming from some mainline religious spaces, and I mean a lot of that is Christian. And I'll say upfront to anyone in your audience who has been hurt by the church or by someone saying they represented God in what they were saying that was hurtful or damaging. I'm sorry for that, because there is a lot of that happens, and that's not right. But I appreciate getting to discuss that element of my life because it is an important one to me. It's it being my relationship with God and with my faith does provide that kind of values framework that you mentioned. And so, according to my worldview, God created people and he cares about the world and how it works. And he's hurt when people are hurt. And, he is saddened by things that are saddening, and doesn't want to see that going on. And if that's true, those values that you mentioned should be the best demonstrated by people who say they believe in God. And that's unfortunately not always the case. But I so appreciate that as the starting place for how I try and navigate the world and do that as best I can. I've failed at that a lot. I failed to treat people with the respect they deserve and see past difference and offer value and respect rather than suspicion or judgment, etc. But I'm aiming for being able to interact with the people around me more like I think how God does, using respect
Mhm.
and value and humility, and not in the ways that I think we often see portrayed. And that needs to happen just in sport, just like in any other arena. And I'd love to see those values propagated a little bit more, especially by people who say they're religious.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned and acknowledge some of the potential harm that comes from expressing a particular view or perspective or value position under this sort of, pretense of, you know, my religion or God's will or what have you, which ultimately can harm other people. And I think that's really important. And again, it's not exclusive to Christianity where these sorts of things can happen, but certainly it's front of mind. And so there are some elements of Christianity and particular kind of flavors of Christianity, if you will, different denominations and different perspectives within the broader kind of Christian family, so to speak. And some of those perspectives can present some challenges for people where maybe there's a mismatch in values or morals, or, there's a more conservative or literal interpretation of the Bible, for example. Things like views around homosexuality or gender roles, or the even the very existence of gender diversity in terms of beyond the binary man woman kind of experience. And, we're seeing a lot of this being played out in the US and Australia and the UK and other parts of the world, kind of under this banner of culture war, or, and it's kind of politicized in a way as well, which makes it even more complicated. And so
Right.
I guess a question there is, have you ever experienced any of those kind of tensions or moral dilemmas where you've had to kind of balance your own kind of personal views or feelings versus some of the, I want to say, traditional Christian views or some of the more prominent Christian views? And how have you kind of navigated some of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And there are really long answers to that question, even on my end,
Yeah.
but certainly within the broad spectrum of opinion, both religious and non. And I would happily, I'd easily chat for hours just on that topic alone, but I'll try and not get too carried away.
Yeah.
But yes, I've definitely experienced spaces where the doctors I grew up with, the ways I was taught how to understand truth, and my relationship with God and my relationship with the people around me and with the Bible, with authority and hierarchy, etc., definitely have had a number of those pretty fundamentally questions. And for myself, my partner is female, and that is a journey over the last couple of years that has absolutely kind of taken me by storm, and was a really difficult thing to traverse, because before that, there's a huge amount of fear and maybe restriction from being able to have conversation around things that are sometimes a very personal, very sometimes painful experiences in places where those dissonances, or where people experience being told one thing by the church, but experiencing another, or by finding in themselves something that they've been told is horrible or disgusting, and that creates such a tension and a really difficult path to walk for countless people, and myself included to an extent. And I consider myself, pretty lucky, and having had a pretty mild version of a path that others can have much more severely. But that has certainly caused me to need to question a lot of what I had been brought up believing, and how I respond to the Bible, like you said, because I do adhere to the Bible and I want it to be used well. I want to understand it, and I want the church as a whole, so the kind of Christian realm, to use it well rather than wield it like a weapon sometimes, which it can be used as and has been. So yes. So in a nutshell, I have experienced that and continue to experience that. So it is constantly both a learning curve and sometimes a difficult, sometimes not so much, but yeah, there are definitely difficult days and difficult pieces, and I've experienced difficult seasons and continue to, but I'm thankful for those because they're good conversations. And I think things are not always clear cut for a reason, to help us learn how to respect each other in the midst of difference or the midst of uncertainty and things. And there's plenty more questions that cause that than, for instance, just the homosexuality question or the gender question. We've got a plethora to choose from. Sometimes I don't understand why things are sometimes really difficult to navigate, and people have really strong divided opinions. But I also think that's an opportunity to learn how to converse and learn how to respect someone else, and to talk through things that are really tough in a way that honors someone and respects their person and their positions too, while at the same time working towards where can we limit harm, where can we work for justice, where can we work for ultimate restoration and true good and healing and community cohesion, all the things that I think God does want for us, and we're trying to figure out how to do that. So that's a rambling answer to the question.
Thanks so much for sharing that and for being candid about it too. And so the tensions that you've described, they play out in sport too. And I think you sort of said it there at the end around it being important to be respectful and find respect and find ways to come together and honor people and honor difference, instead of creating divisions and using religion as a method or a means to create division and difference. And we've seen it play out in sport. Recently here in Australia, we had some challenge with one of our national rugby league clubs who attempted to, they had an inclusion celebration jersey, I guess, and it was kind of had a rainbow stripe on the jersey. But the team and the National Rugby League here in general have a lot of players from Pacific Islander countries, who have a very strong Christian belief system and hold the teachings of the Bible very closely. And the idea of acknowledging the LGBTI community and those sorts of things as part of their jersey didn't align to their moral perspective. And so they actually declined to wear the jersey, and there was a big furor kerfuffle within the league and the club and with the LGBT community and things. And those players ended up not playing in that particular match where they intended to wear the jersey because they couldn't align the values of the intention of the team and the club for that message around inclusion, diversity, and LGBT with their religious perspective. And they weren't able to find common ground there. And there's a whole range of reasons why they weren't able to get it right, but it just highlights that those tensions exist and they're difficult and complex to navigate sometimes. And I think the other thing I think we often forget about is that, religion, whether it's Christian or Islam or any other, is part of our cultural story of who we are and the culture that we have. And it influences how we see and engage in the world. And there's this really amazing guy called Tavale Elalio who runs a business called Mahana Culture. And he describes culture as the water we swim in, right? Culture is the water we swim in. It's all around us all the time. So when we're in our own culture, we don't really see it as culture. We just see it as the world that we're in. So when we see other people's culture, we see that and we see that and acknowledge that as someone's culture, and we call that cultural. But we kind of sometimes need to think about, okay, well, what's the water that I'm swimming in, and how is that influencing my view of the world and influencing the way that I go about what I do? And religion, of course, is part of that, and it infiltrates all aspects of our life, including sport. Also, that's a really great conversation. Thanks so much. I want to shift gears back to sport, back to the work that we do. And I want to know, how did you end up working in the sport policy space, which is kind of an area of work that you're in?
Yeah, I appreciate that question too. To be honest, I don't know that I knew what I was in for when I attended a sport policy degree in the UK. And it was different than I expected. And it was really eye-opening in terms of learning, like I said, how different countries and cultures, and kind of what you were referencing as well, had different cultural areas, contexts, backgrounds approach sports and what sport means in different spaces. It was a really good introduction to things that I had begun to experience and might have been aware of intrinsically, but didn't have language for. Because I'd done, a few of those international coaching stints before then attending that program in the UK. So attending it in a different culture, albeit, a similar one in some respects to the States. And so because of those things, a little bit more approachable and understandable for me. But even with those similarities in play, seeing the way that the UK approached sport, the way a progressive country, or a little bit more progressive than the States, I suppose, did kind of create in me much more of an appreciation for how sport, one, can accomplish things and the power and influence that it can have, and in good ways and also sometimes in harmful ways. And that's, I think, really important to acknowledge. But the way also that different cultures view sport and use sport and apply sport to different things. And remind me of your question, because I think I may have veered off. Why did I choose policy?
Yeah, why choose that? And how does the kind of inclusion aspect of that? Because I know a lot of the work you've done is in sort of gender areas and gender equity and things like that. So how do those two things match up?
Yeah, I think I didn't realize I was solving a problem that I cared about, but didn't realize maybe there was a solution to.
Mm-hmm.
While involved in sport and while playing it as an undergrad in the States, I cared a lot about encouraging, especially females, to pursue coaching roles. I was encouraged by a couple of mentors in my life to consider a leadership position or pursuing something like coaching a viable possibility. And I didn't realize until a little bit later on, and engaging in a program like a sport management and development program that's not a common experience. And
Yeah.
I think realizing how different many other, I would say the majority of other, for instance, females and, other demographics that are traditionally not the majority in spaces of leadership in sport and in sporting contexts kind of lit a fire for me to be involved in propelling that. And I think for
Hmm.
me, it's probably just my love of the underdog and my desire to make sure that young girls are exposed to leadership, that look like them, and to breaking down assumptions and creating newness in places where systems can kind of
Hmm.
be stagnant and stacked one way. I definitely had a passion for that already. And then when engaging in that master's degree and then moving forward into the space where I'm working now, was able to, like I said, put language a little bit more to those passions and find spaces where I was able to encounter people who cared about the same things and were working for the same things. And since then, I've been able to engage with a number of organizations who work towards, like you mentioned, for instance, the gender equity conversation or movement specifically, and also sport organizations that work towards a variety of things that I care a lot about. So community cohesion in
Hmm.
Belfast, or working against poverty or gender-based violence in places like India or places like South America, and a number of areas where those issues are hugely prevalent. Yeah, it has been a huge honor to not just get to experience sport in a kind of performance environment where, it's fun and maybe you work hard, but at the end of the day, you're just playing a sport, to
Yeah. Yeah.
almost the other side of the spectrum where you're working alongside people who know and understand the gravity of what sport can do and the ways that you can use it to further other aims. So people ask me
Yeah.
all the time, when I say I studied sport policy, I usually get blank stares, and then I have to say, well, it explores how sport can be used to accomplish bigger things than just sport. So that is how I kind of stumbled into sport policy and using it to achieve things like inclusion and addressing other worldwide issues and needs. And yeah, and then I've kind of found myself definitely more in that space now as a result.
And in that journey, I guess, well, you identified some real challenges and issues around measurement and understanding how to, I guess, prove the efficacy and impact of some of those policy interventions or policy frameworks or systems or activities around, like you say, whether it's social cohesion or it's inclusion or it's particular target audience outcomes. So tell us a little bit about that and kind of what road that's led you down.
Absolutely. So while engaging in that master's program, I felt bombarded over and over again. I'm sure no one else felt this way, but I am a nerd and pay attention to the fact that measurement proved a difficult part of this case study after case study. It was as if we were looking at organizations that range from, the local community football club to the IOC. And every time we got to the end of the story and they said, we got this one story from a kid that was helped, and we'd like to know better how many people, was that a representative case or not, but don't know really. But we do have this one story of Johnny who really had a good time. And imagine that doesn't actually cut it when speaking to legislators or trying to secure funding for large projects when you
Mm.
have one anecdotal case. So that might be a little bit extravagant, but over and over again in the case studies, in the research, and in the stories that we explored while doing that course, it appeared that measurement was a struggle, and collecting good
Mm.
data was often very difficult to achieve or didn't happen at all, especially from more of the grassroots and the community-based sports initiatives of any kind, whether that was a club or interventions designed specifically to achieve an SDG or a sustainable development goal for American listeners, because we don't know what that is,
Mm.
but the like the gamut of all of these sport applications seem to lack a robust way of actually seeing
Mhm.
whether that was causing change. So it was actually an idea that I kind of put on the back burner before leaving for the UK a long time previous. I had been trying to build an app to gamify rehabbing an injury. And the basic premise behind that was, if I can make it a little bit more obvious that I'm actually accomplished something, that I'm moving forward, even though those changes are pretty incremental. If anyone's rehabbed an injury, which I'm sure many have that are listening to this, it's a tedious process and it doesn't really feel like you're moving anywhere and it's boring. So I wanted to build something that made that a little easier, more interesting, and could show me the impact I was making by doing these silly little exercises that I didn't like doing, and had shelved that, and then came to the UK and saw this issue playing out over and over again where we didn't have the data to show impact.
Yeah.
And started to explore that idea. It was not what I was planning on doing. It was not an intention of mine to come away from a master's program, having tried to start a company and now investing a bunch of time in making that happen. I plan to go back to the States and start coaching again. And all the while, the idea wouldn't let me go, and explored it, had a lot of conversations, started working on really terrible first versions of said app. And I'm now here 3 years into that process, and we're still working on a very rudimentary version of that app. But we're working on trying to solve that problem in a way that's more approachable than current offerings. So we can explore more of that. But that was kind of the nutshell version of how I've found myself in the place that I am at the moment.
Yeah. It's probably a good time to let the listeners at home know that you and I are actually working together and using your app on a particular project. So it's more than just it's a functioning tool. It's a very good functioning tool. And yes, there's a huge amount of potential that it does have. But we're using it for what you've intended it for, which is to measure the impacts of activities and interventions and programs that are happening in the sport world. And we're working with a particular sport organization here in Australia. That project is ongoing at the time of this recording. But what I guess it enables is the collection of insights around things that are being delivered at a personal level to inform how effective the program of activity really is. And over time, and I think it's hard to kind of, I guess, visualize these sorts of things. It's, but let's just say it's more than a survey tool, right? It's not just about a static one-off collection of data. It's about trying to collect things over the duration of a particular intervention or activity or program, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're trying to make it possible to almost tag impact as it happens. So if you think about tagging a picture on social media or sticking a sticky note on something, when impact happens, it happens in moments, and those moments spread out over time. And that's really hard to capture when you're handed a survey at the end of some 6, 8 week, 3 month, 12 month initiative. So making the process of collecting those momentary impacts and the ways that change happens over time easier for both sport organizations and deliverers, and then also the participants that are engaging with the sport activities is our goal and our focus, so that then ultimately both sides benefit from seeing the change that has taken place. So organizations learn and are able to then improve their processes, but also they'll be able to evidence the fact that their efforts are creating outcomes. And participants who you may have never joined a sport before, all the way up through highly elite athletes that are looking for that 0.01% increase, are able to see the outcomes of the effort they're putting in. So if everybody is able to see a little bit more clearly and objectively what their efforts are translating into, that creates a wealth of benefits for everybody involved. So that's our goal, is to make change more visible. And that's kind of what you read there at the beginning. That sounded good, but try to make change happen better, and make it reproducible, make it better implementable, make it stronger, more robust, etc.
And that we talked about, the company we're talking about, of course, is Fathom Performance. And the tool, is I guess, trying to provide that really easy method for organizations to do that, right? And because I think particularly in sport organizations and perhaps in other sectors too, we kind of focus on it when we talk about measurement, we focus on, head counts and numbers through the door. And maybe if we're a bit advanced and progressive, we're also trying to collect demographic data on those individuals. And, if it's a sport program, maybe we kind of, find out how many times they turned up. But we don't really necessarily gather insights around the experience or the impact and outcomes beyond the end of the program or beyond the funding period, right? So we might know 20 kids came to our come and try event and attended 3 sessions and for an hour each, and their names were Steve, Sally, and John, and we know how old they are, maybe. And we kind of use that as a benchmark to say, okay, well, next time we do it, we just want to get more people of different, doing different activities, right? But we don't think about, oh, well, did Johnny go and join a club after the come and try? Did he improve or increase his physical activity levels, which helped him improve and increase his overall health and well-being? Has moving through the sport pathway led to other outcomes like employment or education outcomes, or, all these other impacts are there, and we get them in anecdotal stories, as you sort of said, right? But we got to measure it. So what sort of things make good impact measurement? What sort of things should sport organizations be looking at, collecting and recording and reporting on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of my passion for this space is answering that question, because it's a large kind of outstanding one for a number of verticals, not just sport, like you said, across the development sector, in the corporate space, in healthcare and education. We're all working towards trying to figure out how to effectively get what we did into the outcomes that we hope that they cause or will cause. And that question is being shaped and focused and honed by tons of smart humans around the world at the moment. And there are lots of instruments and lots of tools. So for, if you're a sport organization, or if you're someone who is trying to implement better impact practice and measuring the outcomes that your programs are causing, there are lots of helpful instruments out there that are validated by, academic institutions, or depending on your needs. If you're looking for grant funding, oftentimes those funders will provide you with metrics that they need answered or reported on. But if you're starting from scratch and you're saying, I want to let my participants know better what they're actually accomplishing, or if you want to motivate your volunteers or your delivers, your coaches, your parents, etc., by being able to provide them a little bit better picture of what's being accomplished or what's happening, in the gym every week with their kids or with the participants they're working with. One question that can guide better impact practice is, as you alluded to or mentioned there in an example, looking at after the fact, how much of what you did stuck, how much of the practice or the involvement or the routines that you had your participants engaging in while a part of your program, did they continue after that? Did they find other things to join? Did they continue with your program the next season? Did they start running? Did they join a gym? Did they engage in more physical activity? And asking people after the fact is the simplest way of starting to find out whether your program has made an impact. One of the best starting places, though, for any organization that wants to do better monitoring and evaluation is to sit down and think about the outcomes that they actually theorize or think are being achieved through their programming. Search theory of change, just Google that, and you'll find really helpful literature and templates on actually defining what your programs or your club or your initiatives do and what those mechanisms produce. And you're making a lot of assumptions based on oftentimes good data. So you're assuming that kids involved in XYZ will gain, ABC. Are those true? And write that all down. And from that framework, you then have a starting place to say, okay, if we're assuming that, kids that are part of our football club gain confidence or increase their physical stamina or your mental health or physical well-being, etc. If we're assuming that those things are happening, that's what you then start to measure. So take a baseline and then ask them at the end. That's another kind of tactic. So ask twice. Don't just ask at the end and say, what did you gain? Actually find out from the beginning people's starting place. And then you have a point from which you can measure a change. And so those are some different places to start. And there's a wealth of information out there. And this is something I love chatting about. And so send me an email if you want to chat more about that, because it's a very tailored process. But those are some kind of building blocks to get you started.
And I think that point you make around theorizing the outcomes that you expect or are aiming for at the front end of your initiative or your program or your evaluation is so important, because especially in sport, oftentimes we kind of go into programs, and even when they're, inclusion focused programs, we really only think about whether or not people turn up and how many and for how long. We don't really, it sounds stupid, but we don't often ask them, are they more included or not in the sport before or after the program that we've got them into? And, with your
Yeah.
work and sort of some of the work we're trying to change that thinking and change the way we look at that. And a lot of that's also to do with funding models and how funding works and the benchmarks and KPIs that are actually attached to funding for particular grants and programs and things. So there's that. But that whole process of saying, this is what we are aiming to do. How are we going to measure and ask the people whether or not we actually achieve that? And as you say, you've got to have a base on the front, you've got to ask it at the end, and you've got to collect the anecdotes and the experiences along the way as well, I think. And I think you mentioned right at the start of when we started talking about this topic was that story about, we heard this one story about this outcome and experience of this one participant that was really good. And that's kind of what we were hoping for. Clearly, that wasn't being measured, right? And you've only by accident heard that story. Sure. So again, another, I guess, from a process of implementing this kind of evaluation, how can you collect those anecdotes, and how can they inform the evaluation of programs, and what can that look like too? Because those stories tell you as much, if not more, about the impact of activities than, asking a 10-question survey. Right.
Absolutely. You bring up a good point. And I think no matter what, we'll never move completely away from more quantitative metrics, and we'll never move completely away from that into only qualitative metrics. So those qualitative metrics being the story of someone's life being changed, and this quantitative, including how many people came through the door this year. Both of those have value and they contribute to a picture. And I think you're right in bringing up the fact that the anecdotal story has value when it's paired with showing that, not just that one person out of the 400 that we had involved in our club, but actually, a huge majority of them or all of them experienced some kind of change. That's when the real power of measurements can come together and help you evidence the change that you're creating, not just in a few isolated cases, but at scale. And I think that's something that sport needs to learn how to do better. So you're right. So, an organization, a club, a manager, even someone who runs a Friday afternoon football thing for a kid of theirs or something, anybody can benefit from installing or implementing some kind of measurement framework. And that can be quite simple, and that can range all the way up to something quite robust. But even finding out some of this basic kind of quantitative metrics, even just tracking attendance. If you're not doing that now, do that. That's something more than you had before. But then as you asked there, when you're thinking about what kind of maybe anecdotal or qualitative stories or evidence you can collect, that's a great question. And I think it depends on the audience that you're hopefully, or that you'll ultimately want to hear those stories, as to how to best structure that and what to choose, who to talk to, what story to craft or collect, I guess, and to ultimately you get the best effect from what you're doing. I think it can be a tendency to pick the kid the best, or talk to the one that scores out the goals. Or I think the anecdotal story should be something that I think accurately reflects what's happening on the ground and what's happening to the majority case. But there is also so much value in hearing one child's experience and how that drastically changed their life. That might not happen to every single one, but it happened to them, and that was made possible by the sport. So I think in creating that anecdotal, more qualitative piece, being able to show that the transformation. So finding somebody who can articulate where they started compared to where they finished, I think that's a really important part of creating a quality case study or anecdotal piece, if you will. And then I would say anyone who's hoping to create that, I'd highly recommend collecting even something incredibly brief or simple on the quantitative side as well, just to have, it's almost like having two metrics that stand against each other and back each other up. So when you have even simple metrics as to, even if you're, like I said, and you also mentioned, even if you're only collecting attendance, even if you only know the number of hours, your participants spent on the pitch, or if you know even if you could get some kind of little like handout stat to pair along with an anecdotal story, that just so much strengthens the message that you're trying to convey.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, that it can be quite simple, even to start with. It doesn't have to be this huge, robust, $100,000 evaluation system. Like it can be quite simple and done with some pretty rudimentary tools, as well as some really sophisticated ones. But the key is asking those questions and matching it with the change that people have experienced. I think that's a really good way to put it. Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing. There's some really great tips in there for our listeners and anyone in working in that space and thinking about how they want to evaluate or improve their evaluation. And of course, we'll share Lauren's details at the end of the episode as well. So if anyone's interested, they can get in touch with you. Now, we are running into a longer episode here, but I think there's been a huge amount of value, a huge amount of candid conversation and really, really great issues covered. So let's jump into our quickfire round of questions to wrap things up. So I'm keen to know who's your athlete that inspires you the most at the moment?
Oh man. I should have been better prepared for that one. Honestly, some of the women's female basketball players that I've worked with in Eastern Europe, specifically this group of under 16s that I coached while in Moldova a few years ago, they were the hardest working, most driven, most determined, most humble players I've ever had the privilege of working with. So the admirals out of Chisinau, they run a tight ship. And if you ever get the pleasure of working with or playing against them, I still think about that. And I still think about how lucky I was to coach them. And I still sometimes, on bad days, wish I was coaching them and not the Americans that I'm coaching at the moment.
Yeah.
So that would top my list, I think.
Well, the second question is, who's your favorite sports team? Does that tick that box as well?
I would have to say, related, there's a basketball team out of Zhytomyr, Ukraine, that I've gotten to work with a number of times. Where would they be now? Because it's been a couple of years since I've been there, but they, I think, would be now under 16s. And I have just had the privilege of going back several times to work with this team in just a small city in Ukraine, a couple hours from Kyiv. Shout out to that group because they've been through a lot, and that would definitely be one of my favorite teams. I know that's not exactly the answer you're looking for, but that is a group that's very near to my heart for sure.
Not looking for any answers, but thoughts are with those players as well, because it's a tough environment over there at the moment, obviously with the war going on. So hopefully they're all okay and still shooting hoops. What's your greatest sporting achievement?
Oh gosh, I am proud of having been able to go to Thailand and to work with the team that I did. And we played in an IOC, almost a developmental event. So this was during Rio in 2016, and 3-on-3 basketball hadn't been instituted yet. They were planning on doing it in the next one. So they were running these kind of like pre-Olympic tester sessions, almost tournaments in different places. So that was the last event I was brought in to coach for. And my team did really well, and they got silver. And it was a real pleasure to watch them. We really got trounced by China in the finals. So which was unfortunate, but they did an excellent job. And that was a really proud moment as a coach, because that was the first time that I had ever head coached and had a team that I was responsible for. And I'm really thankful that they trusted me and listened to what I had to say. And
that's
brought
great.
A ton of effort and passion and that experiences I've ever had, really.
And it's always good to get on the podium and get a medal.
Exactly.
Next question, not sport related. What's the first thing you do when you get up in the morning? We learn a lot about people with this question.
It's true. Make my bed, honestly. You know what? It's probably checking my phone, which is embarrassing. I wish that wasn't the case, but I would check my phone and then I know. And then I suppose when I stand up, the first thing I do is make my bed, but really check my phone. So you have to leave it there.
We can work on that.
Turn off my alarm.
That's what I did this morning. Last one before we wrap. What's your number one top best inclusion tip for our listeners?
Listen more. Please just listen more. I think the times that I have been most shook, if you will, most brought to terms with the fact that I was not nearly as inclusive as I thought I was, were times I heard experiences from people that I had never gotten a chance to interact with before, or just heard someone express their experience and learn how vastly different people's experiences can be and how little I understand about them. So that has definitely been the tool that I think leads to any other form of inclusion work for me. And I think that is probably for most people, like listen to people's experiences, seek them out. And that's what should drive anything else you do.
Couldn't agree more with that one. That's a great tip. Well, look, thank you so much for joining me today, Lauren. It's been a wonderful conversation. If you're still listening at home, thanks for sticking around. You would have gathered a huge amount of insight and value from Lauren with this episode. So, Lauren, can you share how can people get in touch with you, learn more about Fathom Performance and the other work that you're doing? How can they connect?
Certainly. And thank you right back, Mike. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thanks for putting up with me and caring to know my opinion. That means a lot. I have a personal blog, which people can look up if they want to, but that's really just updates for my mom to let her know I'm alive when I'm traveling. So not too much fun. So my information about Fathom, you can find at fathomperformance.com, and pretty straightforward. And that would be the place, the front door, if you will, for the work that we're doing on that front. I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm on Instagram, I think at Lauren Schwarr. So feel free to connect with me personally if that sounds interesting to you. But Fathom is at fathomperformance.com, and we'll have more information there coming shortly about how to access the app as we release it more publicly, etc. And then, yeah, feel free to come find me if you're actually interested in having a conversation. I would love to chat more. There's a contact form on that page. And you can also find Fathom Performance's socials through the website.
Awesome. We'll pop all the links and things in the show notes for everybody to access as well. And as always, everybody head over to inclusivesportdesign.com for more free resources, tools, templates, etc. You can also join the ISD community group for free, connect with other like-minded people working in the space, as well as sign up to our free weekly inclusion tips via email as well, all at inclusivesportdesign.com. All the links, transcript for the show and show notes will be below whatever platform you're looking at. And likewise, whatever platform you're on, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We love having you here and hope you're getting a lot of value out of it. I'm certainly having a good time talking to some amazing people. So hopefully we'll keep it up. But that's it for today. Lauren Schwaar, thank you so much for joining us on the Inclusive Sport Design podcast.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael.